everyone, this is Yana Smakula for SimonSaysStamp.com, and thanks for joining me today. Welcome to another episode from my bi-monthly Yippee For Yana video series. In today's episode, I'm making a simple floral card showing some basic pencil coloring using my Polychromos pencils. If you've been following me for some time, you might have noticed how in love I am with these pencils. I love using them for coloring in my card making, and today I'm using just 4 pencils to color one of the flowers from Simon Says Stamp Cosmos background stamp. I'm starting to work on my card by stamping this beautiful background in Simon Says Stamp Fog ink onto a smoke gray cardstock panel. My panel is cut to half of a letter sheet, and I'll trim it down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches later when I go to foam mount it onto my card base. I'm using my stamp platform from Tim Holtz today to stamp this image to have the ability to double stamp it if needed, which usually is the case when I'm stamping a large 6x6 background image. You'll need to use any kind of stamp positioner tool if you'd like to recreate this card, as later we will be heat embossing this same image over the stamping, and to make sure the stamped and heat embossed lines match up, it's crucial to have a stamp positioning tool like this one or similar. I stamped this in Simon Says Stamp Fog ink, although the ink color isn't of much importance here, as again we will be heat embossing over it. I wouldn't use black ink for stamping, especially if you plan to heat emboss this image in white. But any neutral color of ink can work. You can also use embossing watermark ink at this point. You just need to make sure you'll be able to see the lines of the image as you color. I've already selected the colors of the Polychromos pencils that I want to use. I have 3 here, but I also ended up using 1 more in the end. So the colors are Cobalt Green, number 156, Cobalt Turquoise, number 153, Dark Indigo, number 157, and White, number 101. All of these pencils come in a 36 pencil set. This is the set that I personally got started with these pencils. I'm going to color just 1 flower from this entire background. I want to create an encouragement card that says one of a kind, and coloring just 1 flower from this background is a great way to go about it. I'm going to make 1 flower stand out, and we'll add one of a kind sentiment. You can definitely color the entire background if you like, but it's going to be much more time consuming and it might be hard on the wrist. When you color with Polychromos, at one point you need to apply heavier pressure, and doing that over a prolonged period of time is rather tiring. I'm going to briefly tell you what I'm doing here with my pencils, and then we'll go into details explaining the whys. I'm starting with my white pencil, and I'm lightly coloring the sections of each petal that will be lightest or will be the highlight of the petal. Next, I'll start adding my colors, beginning with the lightest color and working my way to the darkest. Finally, I will come back to the white pencil or the lightest colored pencil, and will use either to blend and smooth out my coloring. Now, if you're new to Polychromos pencils and would like to give these a try, I always suggest starting with a small 12 or 24 pencil set and explore these pencils from there. If you get the largest 120 pencil set right away, it might feel intimidating and overwhelming. You might not know where to start, and the worst part is you might not like these pencils. So always start with the smallest set first, and you can add to your collection as you explore these pencils further. Also, having a smaller set will force you to stretch the colors that you do have to achieve those that you don't. So you will learn more about your pencils and ways to blend them when you have less, and therefore you'll become more skillful at using them. I like to work with these pencils on non-white papers. You can definitely color with these on white, but I feel like the beauty of these pencils is in coloring on dark colors of cardstock. The kind of paper you use is very important. When you color with colored pencils, any kind of colored pencils, not just Polychromos, you need to use paper that has tooth to it, as this is what the pencil grabs onto when you color. The tooth of the paper and the pressure with which you apply the pencil matter. If you apply your pencil with a heavy pressure right away, you will smooth out the tooth of the paper right away, and you won't be able to apply any more pencil on top of it. You won't be able to blend and add more color. Think of this as burnishing the surface of your paper with a tool to make it silky smooth. When your paper loses its texture, however fine that texture is, you lose the ability to blend with the pencils. The easiest way to experience this is by trying to blend on Simon Says Stamp 120 ultra-thick white paper. This particular paper is extremely smooth. There's no tooth to it at all. It is fantastic paper for stamping and coloring with Copics, but it doesn't work at all for coloring with colored pencils, as pencil has nothing to grab onto. Watercolor paper is another great example of paper to color on with colored pencils. It has texture and tooth to it, and that allows the pencil to blend beautifully. That being said, you can always combine watercoloring and pencil coloring for adding fine details. When you go to color, start by applying the pencil with a light hand. Do not press down too hard, as you'll have trouble adding additional color on top of it. Let's go back to the coloring we're doing today. Anytime you want to preserve the area of your image white or as light as possible, it's best to apply white pencil prior to anything else. The order in which you apply the color also matters. You won't have the same result or the same look if you color with colored pencils first and then apply a white pencil later as the final layer. You'll have darker colors. So if you need to have a very light area on your image, remember to lay down a layer of white first. I use my white pencil a lot. It's a blender and a highlighter for me. Regardless of what other colors I use, I almost always have white to go along with these colors to be able to stretch them and get more out of my pencils. As I was coloring here, I was having a hard time telling the lines of the petals, so I brought my stamp back and used it to reference my image. Notice I did not remove my stamp from the stamping tool. As with any kind of coloring, I find it is easier to rotate the paper versus having to twist my arm to direct my pencil strokes. So you see me twisting and turning the stamped image a lot. At this point, I brought my darkest color, dark indigo, and added detail to the shadow areas of my petals. If you don't have this color, you can also do this with a dark gray or a black marker. And this is what I mean about not having the full 120 pencil set. If you have less, you'll learn to use what you have. I used my white pencil to color the flower center white. Once my coloring was done, I placed my image back into my stamp platform. I treated my paper with an anti-static powder tool. I touched it a lot with my fingers as I was coloring, so I needed to make sure my heat embossing would be nice and clean, and thus I treated the paper. I inked up this image with clear embossing ink and stamped it onto the paper. I wasn't sure what color embossing powder I wanted to use. I ended up going with platinum embossing powder from Hero Arts. I think it complements this smoke gray background really nicely. I heat set my background, making sure to move my heat tool to avoid paper warping, and I trimmed this panel to 4 by 5¼ inches. The rest was very simple. I foam mounted this panel onto an A2 side folding card base. I used white paper for this. I heat embossed one-of-a-kind sentiment from the Fingerprint Doodles stamp set in white embossing powder onto a black cardstock strip and foam mounted that onto my card as well. Lastly, I used sequins from the Satin Gown Sequin Mix from Simon Says Stamp to embellish my card. I cut some of them apart to be able to tuck under the sentiment panel to have just a partial sequin show. So this finishes this card and video. I hope you will give this idea a try. If you do, we'd love it if you could share your project and tag us on social media. We always love to see what you make. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so. Thanks so much for joining me today. I will see you next time. Bye!